Congress is kind of like a binge eater. We want to diet right after the next dessert. And we all have an idea for a recipe for a dessert. It'll be just a little different than anything anybody else has done, and it'll be really good, and it will save money. Just had to put a little investment up front. Yeah, okay. Well, that's how we got to the problem, which is $20 trillion in debt, headed to $29 trillion in debt. But there are solutions, and we've been working on those as a committee in a bipartisan way. We've been holding a bunch of hearings to see what other countries are doing, how businesses do it, how other governments do it, how states do it. I'll start with some of the bipartisan solutions. One of them is put everything on the budget. Now, of course, that would get a huge outcry, so I've phrased that a different way. Let's put everything on the budget that doesn't have a source of revenue sufficient to cover the expenses each and every year. Another idea we've got for solving the budget crisis is to have mandatory floor time for appropriations. Set aside 2 or 3 months each year that you just do appropriations. Another thing we do is waive the small budget points of order, which cause extra votes, but put a bigger trigger for the bigger expenditures. Right now in the Senate, it takes 60 votes to pass a bill. Well, it also takes 60 votes to waive a point of order. So if you're going to be able to pass the bill anyway, you're not worried about the point of order. But sometimes those are huge points of order. So both sides have agreed there need to be a bigger trigger for large violations. Another thing we'd like to institute is a table of resources for a portfolio approach. That means it'd be a connection between spending and results, and we'd create budget subcommittees that would do portfolio reviews of expenditures. Another thing we'd do is eliminate the vote-a-rama. I don't know if you've witnessed that, but both in committee and on the floor, we have this process where you don't have to turn your amendment in advance. You can turn it in up to the very last minute before the final vote, and it has to be voted on, unless you personally decide not to have a vote on it. And people usually wear out after a couple of weeks of doing that. They're usually just political points that are being made and have really no relation to whether we're going to increase spending or decrease spending. We need to have a new budget commission, like the Brack Commission or Simpson-Bowles. I was one of the co-sponsors of that original budget commission and was kind of disappointed that some of the co-sponsors dropped off of there and we didn't have enough votes to do the commission. But President Obama said we're going to do a commission. He appointed Bowles and Simpson to head it up, and they did it. But I think more participation by more members of the House and Senate would get a little bit of more agreement. And if they were able to break that down into pieces, I think there'd be more of a possibility of getting it through, and then we could vote on it in pieces as well. But it would be an up or down vote. It wouldn't be an amendable vote. And I think that could make some huge changes. Another one that I'm pushing for is to have the Finance Committee each year set the spending guardrails. The Finance Committee does taxes, that's the revenue. So they can figure out what it's logical that they can do during the year and what it's logical that those taxes that are already in place will bring in. I'd also like to see us go to biennial budgeting. I think it's essential that we go to biennial budgeting. There isn't any entity in the world that deals with as many dollars as the federal government does. And we don't ever look at it. You know, we're going to have an omnibus this year. That means that a couple of people are going to sit down in a room and figure out what all the great expenditures are for this country. There's no relationship between the committees and the appropriation subcommittees. Another thing that we could do is have a regulatory budget. And I think this is absolutely essential. This is an idea we got from one of our hearings from Canada. In Canada, the way it works, in order for you to do a new regulation, you got to eliminate an old regulation. So we've got to have some incentive to go back and look at the old programs and old regulations that we've done. So essentially what I'm saying is we need some honest accounting, we need some more detailed accounting, we need some more timely accounting. And I think we're on a path to maybe getting that done. I was hoping that it would be done before the election. That's part of the reason why we've had this bipartisan approach to it. As we've been working on it, nobody knew who was going to be the majority in the Senate. Nobody knew who the president was going to be, and we still don't. But up until we do, we can be very reasonable protecting our own rights. Afterwards, the majority will probably want to make some drastic changes on their own. And that doesn't work very well. You have to have both sides committed to these things, particularly the budget, because times change. So we do know what to do. Got to remember, we just want one more dessert before one more election before we go on the diet.